Someone wrote back that they pissed themselves when I described the current prime minister as one of those as a employee of rental equipment that mistreats his customers. Well, look, that could be made into a full-length movie. I think like that Borat guy, you could do a Borat like movie which was based on that theme. But one of the people standing in the line watching how he callously and incompetently disregards the customer base and the desires of people in the community, again, the home improvement community, that the last person in the line is someone aligned with a geopolitical adversary that says, you know what, I think you got a future in politics. And then, have a close up of his face as it screws up with incredulity. And then the next day, there he is. I can't believe I'm doing this. And then they go through the whole routine where he gets a new suit, gets a haircut, and some stylists that tell him the lines he needs to say. And he goes on to become like a big success. Like based on a couple of recent models that we have, like a mix of like 10 clones that have been legacy operators in our time. Like they have little gestures that you work into it that he has. And how it could end. Could we give it a happy end? I think then we could sort of put like a Dumb and Dumber spin at the end, that it all goes wrong. It goes catastrophically wrong. And he's back to square one type thing. These are ideas, man. I'm telling you, you could have people rolling for the centuries if you did it right. You could turn it into an opera, too. You could have an opera version. You could also have a theater version of it. But it could be shot on film. That idea alone is worth 100 million if you do it right. What would be the name? The Ploptician or something? We could come up. We could spitball names on that. We could do some brainstorming, come up with a name. I mean, of course, it can't be too close to the real thing, otherwise, it could be the real thing. But the premise is there for hilarity, which is what I am for. I am for laughing out loud. I am not for the disappointed segment or demographic. I'm for the being on the inside of the joke, even though I don't profit by it type crowd. Like, in fact, it's like a radioactive detriment to all things good, but you can laugh anywhere, under any circumstances. That's really one of the amazing resiliencies that human beings have. It's got them through worse times than this one. So how about a reverse Kafkaism? That's also a cool thing. Don't look to Kafka. Look at where he developed into. He developed into a bug. How about we develop into butterflies instead, or princes, or majestic, fun people? Because I am starting to see that people have different things, like just different seeds. There's different people, there's different seeds, and the plant, when it blows up, becomes different things. But if you're a good seed, and if you're like a classic grape, that it has many uses that are very well appreciated by people who know what's what, then let boost what you are. Put the right nutrients in the soil, and If you need shade during the hottest times of the day, because that's what the climate is, then span some type of net over the plant that throws like a medium shade. Enhance the environmentals and reduce the detrimentals type thing. Because you will produce good times, just like good plants produce good things. If you think a grapevine is too is different than what I'm talking about, then maybe you're an olive tree, right? Maybe you're corn. Maybe you're raspberries, something like that. Great. You have some good sides to you. You can't turn a raspberry bush into lettuce. Raspberries and lettuce couldn't be more different, and it's quite okay that they are. You don't want to eat raspberries necessarily with your lettuce, although that's an idea. That's actually a combination that would work. If you've got fresh raspberries, but maybe not too much, maybe just a couple to spice it up. But there are valuable plants out there, valuable people of peoples, that in a raspberry bush there might be different raspberries all growing together. That's fine. It could be a bit monotone, but in those monotone environments you can discern in many cases national characters. So it's unfortunate that some national characters are less desirable than others. But it's not necessarily unfortunate for the people who aren't so misfortunate as to be something that, when it gets boosted, doesn't really make for much on the positive sides of things. Now, when I say raspberries, I mean raspberries, everybody thinks of the fruit, but you have to think of the entire plant. Having raspberries in a garden is perhaps not the right setting for them. They're more or less better as a boundary plant, and you don't want to be walking through them because there's a lot of nettles and you don't want to have to be trimming them. So they have their own place. They also have their own soil dynamics that are more advantageous than other plants. So take those variables into account. We have been taught that everyone's equal and all this abstract horseshit, but actually we're very distinct, very much more different than ideologues would have anybody believe. But it's true, so embrace the difference. Viva la différence. And if I could go back in time and correct myself about bad-mouthing bad people, I certainly would, because it is a waste of time, even though if it is funny. I use it as a comic prop. That's it. Bad things, why not? That's a way of dealing with things. Might not be socially acceptable, but certainly personally somewhat. Look, whatever gets you past something, use it. Don't feel bad about it. And if humor is one of your one of the things you use, don't feel bad about it. Don't let anybody tell you you're doing the wrong thing because they don't like it. It's obvious that bad people won't like good descriptions of them. That's why the truth burns them like a flamethrower. They feel like they're being physically attacked. And that's the way it must feel when the description is accurate. And yet it's not the flattering way that they demand of their immediate company. So yeah, popping out of disinfo bubbles, a lot of people, they don't know where to land after that. It's like a Dorlek robot that has been smoked, the Dalek's still inside but can't go nowhere type thing. So just imagine the reality of not being, not having the agency you thought you had. Like you built up this whole life, you're an opera singer, and then finally the result comes back. You stink, you're awful, your voice is worse than broken glass, being dragged over broken glass. And it's not just me saying it, but there was someone that took the time to say it. So why wouldn't a bad person want to kill the messenger instead of seeing themselves in the accuracy, with the accuracy of a mirror? So, but yeah, I would go back and just forget all about them. Instead, I would sing praises to the good, even if it's just one song. Make it a good one and make it long. Here's an agricultural, horticultural way of seeing it, which is scientific, which I always like to come back to the scientific because it has absolutely nothing to do with the politicization of positions of talent. Do we want to call it that? Like there would be talented people in these positions because it was politicized, now we got shit and more politicization. So it's about the water cooler politics. It's not about astrophysics and the extremely specialized and brilliant people that are required for that type of culture, but they don't understand it. So they're the problem. That's how they dumbify their entire societies, by decapitating it, by politicizing it. But that's how they get the power. So they don't know how to stop because they're not of the higher spectrum of normalcy. They're of the subnormalcy trajectory. They don't know when to stop, and they can destroy an entire country that way. And they have. All of these actors have a track record, and it has been documented. It's just that it hasn't been synthesized into a comprehensive understanding of how bad they are, like how bad the results of their impetuous, disastrous, overbearing, despotic, imbecilic aggressions are to good culture. They absolutely destroy it, and sometimes for centuries, but they can't help themselves because they don't have the morals to keep them from terrorizing that which is objectively, supremely better than they are. If they have a possibility or a conduit, a narrative, anything that can give them access so that they can abuse the populations that they infiltrate and subvert. So think of it, yeah, like some horrible organism. There's fungus, look, black mold, that's pretty horrible, and it does grow in dark corners. And it's carcinogenic and has a lot of other properties that people in the Middle Ages didn't know about, that we know about today because we haven't politicized the sciences. And so even on the scientific level, there's similes that could be made that they find inconvenient. Certainly people of that persuasion, I think we can classify all of criminality to be parasitic on the societies that it infects. If you have criminals at the bottom, you're not a prosperous society. You're a decaying society and potentially exterminated society. So In the unfortunate times and sometimes decades that they reign, where their leadership is completely misguided, as in the exact opposite trajectory that a country and nation should be, which is ascendant based on good ethics, because good ethics beget good mental hygiene, such as which leads to mental health, instead of mental detriment, which leads to a failure to assess situations at all times, given the dynamic nature of this reality, which is the place of trials and tribulations, in many cases disappointments, and yet we have a responsibility to each other as the best people in the world. They put us in this box. We are Western civilization. If you are Western civilization, then we all belong together as one, no matter what. Now, when I said to take Russian story at face value, I really mean the Russians that were in strange places before this recent disturbance, because obviously people that were smart tried to get out, but whether or not they stay free or leverage is up for grabs. But you should give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they are okay people. You have to use judgment in every instance, but the people that were there before, you can more or less with a 90% assurity put them on the dud rate. They're duds. There maybe 10% aren't, 90% I'm willing to bet are. The news came out today that there's been some investigation into institutional capture. They called it counter disinformation campaigns. So this is where government blobbyists that had been positioned in their blobbery across different institutions, national security institutions, reached out to social media companies, because social media has sort of transcended legacy media, and they came in with the pretext of counter disinformation programs, but in fact all they did is attacked so-called popular people in a democracy. Now look, there are phony populists, that is a given, but allowing phonies a public platform, look, a lot of times they just have butt type of followers. So they might have a huge follower number, but they're really not all that influential. A lot of people, especially people that comment on political issues, it's filled with charlatans. And a lot of them are paid to make a case. They're information, I like to call them, what is it? Infomercialists. They're information peddlers. And they have a brand, and they have a mesmeric following in a lot of cases. That's why the big news networks always keep the same mesmerists, talking heads in place. But the problem is they're not journalists, they're just presenters of information. Whereas actually the journalist should also be tied to the information that he's presenting. And that way, if he discredits himself, then he'll either have to backtrack or he'll have to make some type of explanation. And it might be plausible, it might not be plausible. If it's not plausible, if he messes up again and there's a connection, then people can connect the dots. here's this phony person, this informationalist, infomercialist, and here he is pitching another turkey. It's a goose chase with this guy. Then the reputation gets tarnished just like a politician. Politician comes out hard on policies that don't deliver. That politician gets discredited. So a journalist, if they make a mistake, they have an opportunity to correct it. But if they're just consistently wrong, people can ignore them. They can unfollow them. They can block them. All those options are there, technologically there, easily there for the viewership. Now, if certain people get snookered with IQs, less than 80, I'm not for inciting mobs, okay? That's something else. I think those types of populists, they absolutely do need to be identified and shut down. Like, this is this, working on the whole emotional type of vibe, working to get people riled up, baiting people, that type of thing. I do agree that should be shut down. But if it's a calm presentation of facts, now this is the problem. You're going to have the so-called conspiracy theorists. But a lot of times, before news can be processed, it is somewhat of a conspiracy. Like, what is going on here? You have to work through some scenarios. And sometimes it does sound like you took crazy pills. Like, why would someone blow up a ship off the coast of Yemen? This is what we have. What happened? And that could seem to be conspiratorial in the beginning of the fact-finding process, but you're just brainstorming more or less publicly what you think it could be as someone who is mildly interested in the topic. But it also invites participation from other experts to say, you know what, it probably wasn't these people. You know what, it wasn't the Ethiopians. It was probably the Iranians, and this is why. And then a journalist will review that information and either incorporate it into their analysis, or they'll reject it for some reason. They'll say, well, you know what, I don't think so because the make and model of these missile systems would indicate North Koreans or Chinese or whoever else. Maybe it was produced in Mexico, something like that. There could be connections like that. How do journalists find things out? Like, it's not immediately apparent when a lot of things happen. And some cases, you're just not going to know. But what is there is apparently an information lobby that also has ideological characteristics, that also has political reasons. So we have a partisan political landscape, and so this type of information is not favorable to their connections, possibly business connections, and so they're either going to downplay the information or discredit it. The best thing to do, if they don't want to change their policies to nefarious third parties that they're in bed with, is to just put the whole thing into disbelief. Like, no, it couldn't have been them. That's a fake story. It's been discredited. It's been debunked. It's been fact checked. You see? And then they don't have to deal with it. They don't have to even entertain the theory that they consider a conspiracy theory because it's been declared a conspiracy theory. So that anybody who uses the theory, however credible, based on the facts, well, they're tainted as a conspiracy theorist or people pushing some type of black propaganda when in fact we're talking about amateurs or perhaps even professionals or semi-professionals who are just working through plausible theories and are open to public engagement. Again, if they come out the next day and there's something that disputes the theory, they might have to backtrack on that. And they can explain to their audience, like, look, I thought up until this point this was the plausible theory until this happened, and then I saw that this was a deliberate type of ruse. And there's reasons why the people that presented the information that way presented it that way, and there's reasons why the people who tried to discredit the theory operated it the way that they did in a more holistic, full spectrum analysis. And a lot of these things, like these campaigns, they're just sort of short term. So they're like, okay, we don't want to have the short term negative results or negative consequences of this information. So we're just going to discredit it for now. But then, like 6 months later, the majority of people catch up to amateurs or professionals. Like anybody can process information, and that's the thing about a democracy. See, feedback culture makes democracy strong. You have 10 people come out of nowhere and say, hey, you know what? These programs you enacted, they don't work. In fact, they're doing the exact opposite they were supposed to do. That's very valuable feedback. The people that give that feedback, they're taking time out of their lives. They're also exposing themselves to ridicule and potentially attack from people that are invested in keeping the program going just the way it is, which is apparently working for them. It's just not working for the citizens of the country. So there's a reason why journalists are attacked. There's a reason why horrible, vulgar, criminal people don't like journalists or journalism or a free press or free speech. They don't like it. They don't have it in China. They don't. They know it doesn't work for them. They don't have it in Russia. They don't have it in Iran or North Korea. They don't. In fact, if you say something off narrative, you're arrested. So I really think that is an indication. Is this a country whose leadership is worth working with? Well, then guess what? They don't suppress free speech. Now, when I say free speech, I am not talking about ideological campaigns that are unpopular but are presented to be popular. I'm not talking about tolerating NGOs that do that, because there are NGOs that do that. That is a loophole. But that stuff could be filtered out. It's just, you see, this new investigation shows that they use that as a pretext for censoring popular opinions in a democracy. And they've done it. So all the institutions that have been infected by people that do that, because they do it for ideological reasons. So again, they're nominally citizens of the country. They had squeaky clean, what do you want to call it, legends, legends about where they came from and what they believe in, and they're patriotic and whatever else, but they're ideologically contaminated. So essentially they hate the country that you think is the country, because they've been taught that the country is something that needs to be fundamentally changed to be a good country. You see? If you could just list all the bad things your country has done and none of the good things, like, just imagine there's 1,000 good things, but you're just focusing on the 10 bad things. That's essentially what they do. So these people feel like that they are justified, that they are morally courageous, morally correct, morally in the good side, and everyone else is on the bad side. That's how they flip these people internally. It's a value flip. And yeah, it is coming from the lower ranks. The people that are just spokespeople, they're not managing their departments effectively if they're allowing people like this to commit these types of activities. And the companies that colluded with these operations, they should be sued and broken up because they were violating the spirit of the Constitution, spirit of the values of the country that they were actively working against. See, this is what we're talking about, institutional capture. They capture the institutions and then they work against the principles of the institutions. It sounds like science fiction. It sounds like a conspiracy, but we just have this phenomenon showing up time after time after time after time after time again across the board. So could this be like considered to be part of a first strike type of procedure, internally weakening political decision-making bodies to have a more favorable outcome on some type of battlefield? Would you think that that's a conspiracy? Would an enemy actor deny that they're doing that? Or would they admit to it? Would they give you some type of closure if you ask them? Or would they tell you you're crazy? Well, what would the people do that are wearing the uniform of your country that are doing that do? Would they say they're working for the interests of your country, or would they say that other people are working against what they think is best for the country, which is manifestly not the case, not in the spirit of the values of the country? So when you have something like that, there needs to be a full review of the institution, and then the institutions behind the institutions that put these people's brains, put their worldviews in their minds in the first place. And that's when we start getting to concepts like pathological institutional contagion. If these people have like a majority, again, they might just be a minority in the company, but a majority of the decision makers on an executive level. They might have just taken over one or two departments: the marketing department, human resources, and maybe not the CEO or chairman, but like the assistant to the CEO or something like that. However, their power dynamics are going to vary from company to company. But each one you need to go through each one of them. How did this collaborative effort take place? Who were the people who were directly involved and who are still ideologically committed to some type of countercultural narrative that is just destructive and never-ending. See, if you question them, they'll say, well, if I do this, there will be a utopia in 100 years or something. But it's going to be messy until then. But here's the spoiler. There is no utopia. Like where these people were allowed to run wild, the conditions are horrifying. Just on every real metric. Now they'll make up metrics. China's a big one about this, and Russia too. Creative bookkeeping, they don't care. So their whole accounting strategy is, okay, what do we need to show foreign investors so that they will inject money into our systems that we will then co-opt at some point? What do we need to tell them? Oh, we need to tell them 1,000 in this little Excel box? Okay, let's do that. And then you have a collusionist party on the other side saying, look here, American people, look at this company. It's doing so well. We check the books. We're a certified accountancy with global reach, and we've certified these books, so this is good enough for Wall Street. And we signed off on it. That's it. Let the free market decide if the price goes up or down. Okay. You would think that something that basically stupid would never work, but it does work because it's a confidence trick. It's people assuming that the people that have the responsibility to verify the numbers are doing that, but they're getting kicks. And it's really hard. It's really nebulous. Have you ever gotten into big like accounting investigations? It's very complex in many cases, and they use that complexity for these types of gray zone activities. And they've been using it for a while. I would say this has been going on in Wall Street since even before uh, the the creation in 1919 of the International and their terrorists in the Western world. And that has been a big avenue for them into companies and to countries and to ownership and to management. And then finally to the ideological signaling that they do in their captured and contaminated entities. Now in this case it's very shocking because we're talking about U.S. Security institutions. But why should that be shocking? We're talking about people here, right? And these types of methods work on people. They work on companies. And they do work on countries. So it's not just the United States. They're doing the same tactic in all of Africa. So all these Sahel flips, that's what they were using. Would they not use them for their primary adversaries in the world? Of course they would. Now, if you take yourself into a time machine, go back to the 70s, people would just be flabbergasted that these types of operations were allowed to even get off the ground. But because they created a state of disbelief after '89, that was all under the aegis of a totalitarian information sphere that didn't appear to be one, that had new characteristics. They allowed the snow job to happen because certain people were getting rich off that. That's it. The decision makers were getting rich and have gotten rich. Now that's something you could put an accountancy firm on, but one that's not contaminated by their type of people. And you could probably just do some basic checks, like for example, anybody that's dealing with Russian or Chinese or Indian or Brazilian or South African assets, they're most likely overcooked in more ways than one. So would that be easy to connect the dots? Well, it would if governmental institutions weren't captured by ideologues. But right now, it's like a 50-50 type thing. People want to get rid of lice, but it's really hard. Sometimes they lay eggs and they hatch like 3 weeks later. So it's a cycle of parasitism, and it's very tenacious. So getting rid of it, it's gonna take a lot more than public exposure. It's gonna really take a lot of fine-grained oversight and not giving people the benefit of the doubt. If they're off on this trip, nothing they ever do in life is going to be good. They've been injected with bad causality. They're bad causality bringers. They bring dissension, they bring fights about nonsensical historical takes, they bring dissension, they bring poison frames. They don't bring productivity, they don't bring strategic decision making that's best for the most people in the country. So it's unfortunate, a horrible time in a lot of ways to be alive during this time, just horrifying. If you're a good person and you feel just really estranged from your institutions, it's normal. That's normal behavior. But what's not normal is that our institutions became estranged from us. So we shouldn't accept that. We shouldn't tolerate it. It's not normal. There's nothing in the contemporary culture that should be justifying that or rationalizing that. All that is just loony birdism. If you see loony birdism, you just gotta say, all right, these people have been loony birded. During wartime, for example, when they were running these operations on prisoner of war and stuff like that, they would have to go through some type of deprogramming program psychologically to get out of the matrix that they were put in. And we're talking now about millions of people who have been exposed to these programs. So I don't know if you want to call them walking wounded, because they're actively negative forces in any society that they are. So they're sort of like a perpetrator class, a self-righteous perpetrator class that is immune to counter-arguments. So they're zealot ideologues. So whether or not they're going to heal, it's really up to them. But as far as identifying and removing these people from any public office or any area of influence, that's going to take some time. But I do think anyone that wants to live in a civilized country is just going to have to start doing it. And it's not because people want to do it. They should have never been pointed in the wrong direction in the first place. But they were relying on institutions, they were relying on the credibility of these institutions, they were relying on journalists that were suppressed, censored, canceled, debanked, etc. by their own security institutions. Now it's all out there for the public to see. So now that you know that, there needs to be a lot more pushback, and not just pushback. It is of vital interest. If your political class is just running around in circles, it's not solving problems, and it's not protecting itself. And it's ceding territory to enemy operators. That's just the way it is. So for enemy operators, it's great. Internal and external, domestic and foreign, it's great. But for patriots and sound citizens and civic institutions and prosperity, and the pursuit of happiness, no, it's diametrically opposed to all of those things. So stop giving people the benefit of the doubt, start applying more comprehensive identification matrices and identifying bad operators, and stop following people that are just involved in these info operations. They mess up like that. So, see, that's the thing. A politician has to be kicked out of office, but a journalist can just be unfollowed. That this journalist is not disreputable. And that can go all the way up to the journalistic broadcasters. This broadcaster, the BBC, look at the how many people have tuned out. That's a disreputable broadcaster. So you just now. That doesn't mean 100% of what they produce is wrong, but you could probably guess that 90 to 80% of it is off base on some point. If you're an expert, you'll be able to see it, but if you're not, it's probably not worth your time. I'm not saying that there are any alternatives, because they like to keep, in totalitarian systems, they don't like you to have an alternative. And you'll see this, like companies, like for example, Instagram should not have been bought up by Facebook. That was like a competing social outlet, and so this type of monopolization of social media should absolutely not be tolerated. And there should be more of a civic responsibility in these platforms, not to censor popular voices, but to censor the crazies that are operating in the paradigms I just described. And that is with or without some type of government oversight of government institutions that have the same damn problem. So how do we know about this story? There was a whistleblower somewhere. Somebody blew the blew the whistle on these people, so good for them. That's also a part of journalism. See, journalists rely on whistleblowers, and then they bring it to the public, and then the public, it's not infotainment. This is not an infomercial. This could be vital information, and the public needs to mobilize, like on a Euromaidan type way. Turns out an institution has problems with these types of issues. There needs to be like pickets the next day. There needs to be people calling different people that need to know this stuff. Because only together are we strong. If we are not united, they will defeat us. So it's about connecting with good people, and it's also about sorting out the bad. And sometimes good people go bad, you sort them out too. And bad people, you don't give them the time of day, because you only got so much time in a day. Don't wreck your day with bad people. Don't wreck your day with bad thoughts. You have a recurring thought, you have a recurring regret that maybe you got snookered during these operations. Let that go. Today is a new day. You know what's happening out there. You're a little bit more savvy. And that's just the way you gotta be. You thought you could walk out on the street and not get mugged. Now you got people out there mugging people. So don't just be staring at your phone. Have your head on a swivel, at least when you're in places where that can happen. And we got this now in the information sphere. They got something against popular people. But again, you should be popular for the right things, not for sensationalist things. Like they're fronting fake populists now, or trying to get into the fake populist game. So you got to look through that too. Now, Trump, I would not call him a fake populist. He might have some connection somewhere, but if you look at his first term in office, he did not do a lot of stupid things. What he did do is make a lot of the ideologues I just mentioned very angry, because they just wanted to have a monopoly on political institutions. So they did everything they could to undermine his presidency. And they're still continuing with that. Like, oh, he has this connection. Look, he's probably not 100%, but what he did do was break up their racket, and they hate him for that. So that is an indication that people on that side of the divide, if they're still on that side of the divide after all these things have come out, they're partisan activist elements. And they should be seen as such, and they should be treated as such. They're immune to information that's not favorable for them. They have a selective way of presenting the facts and operating and virtue signaling, and at the same time doing these types of operations. So they got to go. All of them need to go, and hopefully, just like the Tories have collapsed, the whole credibility has collapsed, everybody will get thrown out and they can start over again. We can only hope. But if they don't get their act together, they're just going to continuously lose. As long as there's a fair platform where we're not dealing with wall-to-wall infomercialist, yeah. So if your brand that you thought was working pretty good gets captured, and then they come in with the infomercialist party line, then you're going to have to dump that brand too. And look for new ones, and then look to places where people can still talk about things and figure out where is the new information coming from, because they do like to take out the other side that presents a different narrative. They like to do that. That's part of their method of operations. And it's not that nobody's immune. Just because you know they're doing it doesn't mean you can ultimately prevail. They have a whole lot of different ways to mess people up. And they do see that as part of their political activity. This is what makes them, realpolitik people, because they'll do that. Other good people won't do that. They'll do that. That's what makes them successful. So yeah, you need to be able to recognize people like that, and don't vote for them, and don't believe them. Now, that's not to say that the other side's going to get everything right all the time. This is not to say you need to turn off your critical thinking abilities. Don't ever do that. But do realize that you could be getting rooked on something. You could be taken for a ride. It's just you can also get off that ride once you realize you're going in the wrong direction. Don't feel bad about doing that. Looking back to historical incidents that were as infamous as we are experiencing today, you need to look no further than the Moorish invasion of Spain in the year 711. Now you have to think back to that time. Spain was sparsely populated. It was ruled by Visigoths that were only 4% of the population. There was a bunch of other tribes there that they had subjugated. And as is known amongst Indo-European peoples, is that families, even noble and especially aristocratic families, that might also have a family history of being greedy and also being somewhat brutal, perhaps somewhat unjust, that if you have a lot of them, family members that might inherit those traits, that sometimes they don't learn the skills to work together. Now, sometimes they're smart enough not to stab each other in the back because they do understand that it's way smarter to be unified than to be fractious. But that's a rational principle that they might even admit, but their practice might not be so good. In practice, they might be working against the others. And a lot of this has to do with vanity and unskillfulness of the other party members. People wanting more than they should have, rather than going along to get along in a group that is mostly on each other's side. But if someone wants to be number one and they don't get to be number one, even though they should have been number one, but somehow it was decided that this person should be number one instead, and there's only one spot, you can have fractious situations that also involve fractious loyalties, which also involved intrigues and potentially overthrows, and then bad blood between the parties, and all of that jazz that we have come to know and love on this human plate of existence, that I ascribe to comical tragedies. Humans are a volatile bunch. I love coming back to families, actually big families. 12 people, they're completely different people, but they're family. Some of them, again, share traits, but these traits turn into contrary type of situations. That means the old man was ornery, and all of his damn kids too, including the women. And it might, again, have some good factors, but it is the characteristics of them. It has some bad ones too. And if, again, all of them are ornery at the same time, you've got the Hatfields and the McCoys type situation. So now the historical chronicles are somewhat sparse, but there does seem to be the theory that there was fracturing in the Visigoths, between the Visigoth families of the time, and they weren't all that numerous to begin with. Ergo, they weren't very politically or militarily put together. and fighting amongst oneself. This was also the Byzantine problem. This is the Greek problem. See, Greeks are great people on an individual level, but when it comes to coming to understanding with other Greeks, if you have 3 Greeks in a room, they'll create 4 political parties, right? And they all have to be right. And if they become irreconciled to each other, they will fight each other tooth and nail and turn it into some type of drama, lifelong drama, instead of letting grudges go. Like, dropping grudges, that's skillful. Going along with the national stereotype, which means holding on to grudges, that's not skillful. I don't care who you are. So you can also say that acne as a teenager might be something that a certain people have, mental acne, but they can also cure that. They don't have to tolerate it all the way through their lives. And if they do have an outbreak, it's their responsibility to get it under control. Because that's about as appealing as obstinacy, vanity, conspiracy, hatefulness, greed, and everything, other defilement really looks like. You're an impudent person, you're a might is right person, you're going to bust your way in, take something, you're going to feel like you've been slighted, that there's people that outshine you. There's nothing good about that, so work on it. If you have it, drop it, cure it, let it go. But yeah, the skillful people, that's not common, right? That's super normal. Skill is super normal. Common is vulgar. Vulgar is a new batch of human beings every generation, and every generation is a dice roll. And even if you become an enlightened philosopher later in life, that doesn't mean you were one in younger years. There has to be a certain understanding for young people, but staying dumb and young like that's not skillful. And it's really not excusable when it happens. It's understandable, but it's still a mistake. Now, there are people that can learn from their mistakes and people that just keep doubling down. Don't be the doubling down type person. Cut your losses, especially if it has to do with self, which doesn't exist. It's a delusional aspect of human personality and identity. What do you do? Well, what do you do? It doesn't really define you. It's just ancillary. Consciousness is potentially infinite. So again, sociologists, materialists, no, you're defined by your birthday and where you were born and your family, and you were supposed to be a prince and that didn't happen, so now your life's over type thing. Nope, you never were what you thought you were. You thought you were that, that's it. That's the delusional self-making process. So, but to come back to the Visigoths, so they were divided, then you had animosity, and the theory is that one of these knuckleheads went over, because there had always been animosity with the Berbers on the North African coast, who were more or less nomads that overran the North Africa up until that time. This was a sort of an old Asian business model for them to be nomadic, militaristic, Turkic Muslim type of outfits, and they had pretty well-to-do cavalry tactics, and they knew they had to come in numbers. And because they have a more hierarchical society that's more organized, the women have more kids, and a lot of different older traditions that go back to the Mongols because it's the same business model and franchise that they developed there with the same type of results. They would go on raiding parties. Let's get together 3,000 horsemen and see what we can shake loose. On the other side, where there's people that have higher developed Indo-European cultures, go on a campaign of robbery and mayhem. It's just a level of scale. So that people would say, oh, it was a military operation. What does that mean? Just look at it for what it is. Bunch of men on horseback, bows and arrows and swords, figuring things out as they go. And in 7-Eleven, because they were weak and divided, they made inroads with that franchise onto the continent of Europe. Similar to what they did in the Balkans and elsewhere, all the way up to the Altai Mountains. Because the Turkish tribes did originate in Mongolia. So think of all that ground that they've covered. Now see, they understand their culture. It's just people outside that culture don't understand them. Certainly modern neo-barbarians that have been fed a whole boatload of tropes. Have been bedazzled with optimistic, illusory, utopianistic jazz that have been weakened psychologically and misdirected sociologically and suppressed economically, mismanaged and dispossessed globally, while keeping the lights on, right? Just switching out political leadership, substituting it out, simulating it, selling it as some type of evolution when in fact it's decomposition. So, but to come back to the Moors, that's how they sort of got their in, and then of course they set up a franchise there. They ripped everybody off, that they took over the lands, they enslaved the people, and they dug in for the centuries. And you just have to think of that type of model. Then all of a sudden slave trading grew up, started to flourish in those places. You had traders coming from Africa, like the Zanzibar type triangle. So they had just more European slaves than on the market at that time. And that attracted some merchants and some type of people that didn't have any moral qualms dealing with slavery of people that weren't affiliated with their religious understandings of the world, that allowed them to do that with impunity because their God said so, and made it so in this hell realm of trial and tribulation. Because might makes right, that's what their God said, so long as they had enough power to say so. But that situation changed for them. Just let's not forget, it flipped on them. Now, some of the damage was done. Some people say, well, some of it was they did make some contributions, and it wasn't all bad. And in the case of Spain, that could be the truth. But at the end of the day, they did get rid of that franchise at some point, at least culturally, on a day-to-day level. So I don't know if the pros outweighed the cons for them. Apparently it didn't. So, but you can be stuck in bad situations like that for centuries. Balkans know it, Spain, the Spanish know it. But Western civilization as a whole can forget that story and look at it. It's just been repackaged in a modern way. They don't have to swim their camels across the Med. They just have to fly the Med and have their proxies inland, stamp whatever needs to be stamped, and house them however they need to be housed. And so, yeah, just think, well, that wasn't your people that did that. That was their proxies that allowed that to happen, and will continue to allow that to happen unless that situation flips on them like it did in the past. So that's how you can learn from history, for example, and then you can make parallels. And this is what the enemies of the West analyzed, and this is the strategy they went with. And this is the modern iteration of that. So they've committed first, second, and third strikes, 3 strikes. They're out. Here's another prisoner dilemma type situation that people should use as a simile to help them understand how more complicated things happen that are bad on an institutional level. Just imagine your boss is a government, and the government appoints a minister, and everybody gets paid as long as that connection remains good. And so imagine the workers of that institution that don't want to do anything or just want to enjoy some kicks while not doing anything, which is to say earning money on side gigs that one shouldn't really have the time to do if one was truly devoted to what the institution was set up to do in the first place, be it security or legislative oversight bodies or judicial organizations or informational companies, technological companies, defense outfits, you name it. And they just decide, okay, the only person we have to care about is the person that gets appointed to governmental positions. So let's focus all of our energies on making sure that the political process works for us and that we don't get any oversight, we don't get any pushback. And then we have our tenure, we have our money, we have our position, we have our esteem, and we're covered. That's it. And that's why these self-interested parties get into politics, and that is absolutely something that should be looked out for. That's why all of the institutions do require oversight, and they require oversight by the people, and they should be subjected to independent multiple review processes that are harder to game than the processes that apparently now are in place, because they're not working, because all of that's been politicized as a rule. So because we're living in such a degraded time where these types of shenanigans were allowed to go on for far too long, we have something called the institutional rot, of which blobs are part of it. But if you notice that it's been rotted out and there should be some independent investigative committees, then you just have to start from zero. Everybody gets fired and potentially served with some type of charge. Now, the difficult charges like conspiracy or what have you could possibly be added, but just a basic charge of criminal negligence could just take care of a multitude of problems just based on the fact that the institution isn't creating the performance that should be comparable to countries' institutions' performance that are working properly and have good results, which are reflected in good social conditions, for example. And they haven't taken zealous ideological stances on things that are counterintuitive to people from the rainforest, for example. They just have a basic human understanding of values and of cultures and the continuation of cultures and flourishing and the freedom of cultures to express themselves without being browbeaten every stage of that process into avenues that aren't really all that prosperous or intuitive just on the face of it. Things like that, just basics. For example, someone that knows about all these little spy cameras that they have out these days, like has like some type of light that he can shine, and he can then see what's in the room, and then on the basis of how many of those are found, that one can conclude, that the place is messed up. It's not a place you want to be. And the people in that place that feel comfortable in that place, they're not people you necessarily need. Something of that previous arrangement might really have been significant for how the place was managed. There's a causality there that should not be disregarded. Imagine like a hotel that has that. That's not a hotel you want to stay in, is it? You don't know where that's going. Who's doing that? What's the reasons for it? You might come up with a dumb, vulgar reason why they want to do it, but they might have complex reasons for doing it. You might not be the person they're doing that for. So on principle, the whole operation is a flop. But only a specialist would be able to determine that, right? With the right type of light that they can shine in the right place of corners. And there does need to be follow-up on that. It's not like, oh, let me just tell the public about this. No, the public, once they learn that, the people who are responsible for shutting those things down, they should be informed. And if they do not do it, then they are in dereliction of their duty. Ergo, they are part of the problem. They need to go too. And if the person who appointed that person to do it doesn't get rid of them, then they get the charge as well, you see? And then that can go all the way up to a prime minister. Well, he gets hit with it too. You need to elect a new government then, don't you? Now, if they won't let the electoral process work without them manipulating it, then that's a bigger charge, isn't it? If all their candidates won't mention the fact that problem hasn't been addressed, then they are de facto illegitimate, and that's how the process works. That's sort of the Euromaidan concept that can be applied to any country, anywhere. And the result of that is better civic engagement and better results. And that's something that every true citizen should want for their country. They should want that. Let's not get too idealistic. There's still going to be people that don't want that for their own reasons, so you're going to have to be able to deal with them too. And don't assume the naive values that you have are everywhere the case. They're not. You go below normal to the subnormal, they just want what they can take. That's it. And that could be 50% of people that aren't cut out for the job. So make sure you're selecting people that are above average as far as ethics, integrity, and honesty go. Coming back to some previous episodes where I was describing a politician. Politician is a good person. They don't have to be an intellectual. The main thing is that their heart is in the right place. Like Vitaly Klitschko, that guy, you can just see it. He's not kidding. He also had enough money. He probably has less money now than he did when the whole thing went down. And in fact, he didn't even have to come back and take up a position as mayor, but he did it out of a sense of duty. That guy, he could be anywhere in the world just enjoying himself if he had the nihilistic personality. But he manifestly doesn't have it, and you've seen it over a period of time. So, yeah, Klitschko for president, I think that sends a very strong message that we haven't even gotten into the third round of this. Maybe this is only the second round. But a guy like Klitschko, he's going to go 12 plus. He's going to be in overtime. That guy, he's fit. He's fit mentally. He's fit physically. And he's not just talking. He's not saying I can do this and that, I can knock somebody out. He's not that type of guy. And yet, and sometimes you can get into fights and you didn't even want to get into the fight. But he's not going to let you down. You tell him something, he'll know what to do. He'll try to figure something out. This is the other thing, being a person of the people. He's a man of the people. In fact, he is. You know he's honest. He is honest. He is definitely honest. He's not going to lie to you. Especially when it's something of national importance. That's the type of trustability that you need to have in a politician. So Ukraine's lucky to have him. Really lucky. And it should make that fact a reality. Yeah, Klitschko for president. I'm 100% for it. That doesn't mean anybody needs to have a problem with that. You can just do a clean and efficient transition of power just because we need hitters. That's it. This is about hitters. It's not about games. It's not about presenting yourself this way and not delivering. This is for the long haul. This is for overtime. This is what separates the real from the not so real. And that type of personality where you know that person has skin in the game and you know exactly where they are, that's when you can start either approaching people on a legitimately congruent basis, or you can leave it, but at least you know what you're dealing with. A certain meaning, a certain flavor of a certain meaning, a certain nuance to a certain meaning. That's what makes language fascinating and enjoyable at the same time. That there's depth to language. It's not just the word. The word you have is just the label. It's just the nama rupa. There's label and there's meaning, but how deep is your label? Is it superficial? Most likely it is, which is okay. There's no need to go into the philosophy of language. Language has utility, like a screwdriver, but there's different screwdriver designs, and there's also different tools than screwdrivers that we can label with language. And so we can get very detailed in our descriptions, which is a good thing. If you're an artisan, a craftsman, you can use language to describe things in detail. If you have the will to describe things in detail, if you have that type of will, the will to express most precisely the thing. Language is a tricky business. A lot of people reveal a lot of things about themselves by the words they use and how they use them and in what way to describe one thing or another. Language can conceal things. Language can conceal a utopianism, which is ideological, that is also a sociological distortion that is politically motivated. Now, you can describe that to someone, but if they really know what you're talking about or not, or if they're capable of understanding it or not, that's quite another thing entirely. But you should think of them as persuaders and explainers. They're trying to persuade you for a position that they are in the employ of, to make something seem more palatable than it perhaps is, because impunity has terrible side effects, and if those side effects become known, that could limit the impunity, which is of course best for the most amount of people, especially good people, the most amount of good people left. But that's not good for very few bad people that don't want to change, that don't want to be persuaded by speech, by ideas, by concepts, by different points of view. What a wonderful wealth that is to look at something from 1,000 different viewpoints and not be personally invested in just one outcome. That may be illusory. We can delude ourselves. People can be deluded into waging war on others. And others can be caught up in different types of organizational units that have been ascribed to one, whether one feels it's an accurate description or not. When has any group anywhere, you go into a diner on a Sunday morning in New Hampshire somewhere where the town still works, or at least did work, how many of those people do you really have commonality with? If you are from out of town, perhaps. Now, some people might say that they found, surprisingly, to their surprise, a lot of commonality with people that were there. Ergo, life was good. There was a lot of understanding. There was a lot of civic strength. A lot of contribution to the general good, the general wholesomeness and capability and capacity of the place and the people, the nation that was there. So it's not something you can just switch out or remake, especially not without a vote, a popular vote perhaps. And yet if we're talking about people that just got into positions to leverage the sociology, and this is what they're doing, and this is what they came up with, and it's totally unacceptable and disastrous, and has a proven track record at this point, and still there are people that are too personally invested, that are lost to a sunk cost fallacy and perhaps even malicious intent. Well, that's their problem, isn't it? Their problem to solve, or perhaps not to solve. Maybe it won't get solved, and maybe some good times will be upon us again, when good people get in good positions to do good things for a good amount of people, and not for themselves. No, not for themselves. In form of personal enrichment. That is the number one ethical standard that politicians should have amongst them. If you take a side deal for something that you're not personally convinced is the appropriate thing to do for the most amount of people, or you don't have any ideas at all, you just let them get pitched, and then you decide which ones you're going to go with, and then that's who pays you, and you don't care about the country. You're not conducting politics. You're just mismanaging things in a fancy way. Now, whether or not there will be trials for criminal negligence in high office or not, or as it was, a tribunal, that is in the stars. But Working countries would probably have to have something like that, not because they want to do such things, which are not fun. You know, when a ship catches fire and the insurance inspectors are called in, that's not a fun job. That is really not something anyone wants to do. That is not relaxing at the beach type of a Monday morning on a late November day in a northern climate that is inhospitable and everything is burnt out and messed up and nobody knows why. The faces are grim. The facts are grim. The situation is grim. And that information that you find out in that catastrophe could save untold people's lives. Because if it is something that is preventable, then it certainly should be prevented. That's how politics can be too. Just take off what you think is our political culture of this day. Bring it to zero and think about reinventing it, but really start off small. Because it's not just about talking to other people, it's about talking and focusing on sensible, practical things. Such as the possibility that we have been attacked in a asymmetric way on this level, and the results are telling. Such as the simple principle: garbage in, garbage out. It's just that simple. If you think what we have now is garbage, then you do have to look at the causality of how that was created. And getting back to then the most basic of decision making for with tried and true principles that does not involve multiple loyalties or multiple interests or compromised interests, compromised principles. Good governance is not a thing any country can afford to neglect. There's a reason why, for example, the United States was such a great country to live in. To live in, not just to work in, to live in. Because it was a free country. More or less, a lot freer than these other countries that have a lot more people, you see, and they got a lot more governance. And they got a lot more people that like to govern people but not do anything else than that. Just sort of mind their plantations. Extract the taxes, misdirect it to God knows where. And the people that could have used that revenue, well, who cares about them if they don't do anything to change that situation fundamentally? They're the dodos of history. That's what they talk about amongst themselves. But publicly, they're crusaders for a humanity that doesn't yet exist. Might never exist in the form that they're saying that it's going to be so. Rainbows and balloons, but not even halfway to their final goals of pure exterminationism. The writing is on the wall. Certainly, it's their little experiment has not translated into good things for a good many people. The 95%, in other words. But rest assured, they're not in your neighborhoods, otherwise they would care. Because they do have NIMBY down. They do understand NIMBY. They just don't need a lot of space to live. Just, I don't know, maybe a small region somewhere. So that's something, the illusion of a civic culture, that's something that can also be to your detriment if things have fundamentally changed as far as your representation goes. Your representation is letting in people off boats, they long since stopped caring about you. And the people they let off into those boats, who knows what they're going to do with them later if they're not working. Like they're collecting welfare benefits from people that are that, let's say, heartless as far as results are concerned. I guess you could look to countries like Jamaica where they've done that too. But you could also look to Haiti, and then you could think, in a colder climate, would that really be advantageous for them long term? If the food trucks don't show up or something like that. So here's another thing. All of these wizards, political wizards that created immense damage. You can wreck culture. You can wreck the culture of a company, but building one of those things back from zero, from scratch, without the right people, or without the right support, or without guidance that is nothing but sabotage by people that have commandeered the finances. That's hard to recreate. Recreating the United States after you destroyed it, is that even possible? Or are we talking about a substitutionist model again? Same thing goes for Russia or any other country. What are they transforming themselves into? So if you don't have an interest in what they're pulling off at this point in time, and I would assume that's 95% of people, then you really should consider whether you should let this current 5% decide which way the place should be managed. You want to have a great country with great freedoms, great prosperity, according to the Bill of Rights. You want to go towards that place, or you want to go where these people are already discernible. You can get on a flight and check out how their homelands are managed. You want to be like that, like them. Chances are, if you can still listen to this, your country is still better. So no, not everything is lost. It's just we have to lose these naivetes. This naivete, yes, our delusion about our so-called friends. Yeah, friendly to what end? They get to divert the resources away from the culture it was set up for. Yeah, that's a heist. So obviously people are in on it, but it's not a lot of people. And the detrimental effects of that are really spectacular and obvious to anyone that cares to look. Unfortunately, we have these news cycles. They're not looking there. There's somebody, some again, D-personality that caused some type of beef, and that's the big story of the day. That's that's pointless. That's a waste of time. Meanwhile, there's major security concerns all across the board, multi-spectrum. They don't have a time to cover that, not even 1 minute. But they're devoting 60 minutes to subnormal behavioral expressions and displays. Is that what you think helps mental health, or is that something that if you do that over time, and you're told it's the most important thing, that you could just lose the script entirely? These people watching reality TV shows that are that degraded, they look like monsters. They got all different types of Botox, tattoos, and body alterations. These people are, again, frightening to Aborigines. So that isn't the culture of anybody or anything. That's not Western civilization. That's some type of distortion. So now some people could say, look, this is bad karma, this is bad causality, and there's something to be said for that, but the encouragement of that leads to more people going the wrong way and having bad results based on that. That's why you tell kids not to play in traffic. That's the argument for morality that these pseudo-intellectual atheists and doubters and skeptics will never admit. It's that practical. You have good morals, you'll have good results from it. Go to bed early, get up early type of person versus the one that's been sold a hustler lifestyle. That the first one's gonna do better things long term. Maybe you'll even take a nap or a siesta if you can, and not try to make another 2% on some abstract investment to optimize his day with productive things, because otherwise he wouldn't be producing enough to justify his existence. What a rat hole that is. It's a rat hole culture. That's not going nowhere. You got no fat, no time, no air, no space, no nothing. You got a lot of tasks and aggravation and not much to show for it. Not short term, not long term. So for the people who think that that's the self-identity maker and pride themselves on getting ahead in that game, they're really not getting ahead. Even if they think they have. They've just gone the wrong way, bigger and faster. Most of them. Even if they won't admit it publicly, why would they do that? That's embarrassing, isn't it? Well, it is if you have a big ego, it is. It's not if you have no self. And that's easier said than done. Like, people would say, oh yeah, sure, I'm like a kung fu expert, look at me. I can do a kick, I can do no self. Oh, sure you can, yeah. You can repeat the word. Can you manifest the concept? Can you keep it that way? How long until you go back? So, mental health, a culture that has good mental health because they have a good culture, because they devote time to mental health. Not because they need it necessarily, but it's a good thing to have. And why shouldn't you need it? I do think people need it. People do need guidance. Tigers, you don't have to tell them what to do. They just become what they are. People, especially in these highly over-socialized, post-industrialized environments, they don't necessarily have that. And so curating your culture, allowing yourself to self-develop into skillful paths, that you're doing yourself and everybody you know or everyone you will know a gigantic favor as long as you're alive. Now, for the people neglecting their health, and there's certainly a lot of people doing that, I advise against that as well. Stop overeating, stop abusing your bodies, and get off these hectic schedules. And if you do have to do a lot of hectic things, then develop the skill of Zazen while you're doing them to conserve yourself. It's like putting on skin balm versus nothing. But don't also go too far out into the future. Maybe you're having a bad day. Maybe it's a bad week. But don't go projecting it out across the span of your life. If you're in the future, you're in the wrong place because you're delusional. Just give yourself a crack in thinking it's inevitable. Just say, maybe not. Just say that to yourself, especially when you find yourself over-focusing on things like that. Maybe not. Maybe there won't be a nuclear war. Maybe not. You see? It snaps you out of it. Just a fraction of a second will allow you to grow, to gain distance from a false future. Also, false past. Oh, your grandfather, all your people are bad people. No, they weren't. People saying that's just, it's libelous. Are there people that are below normal that would conduct libelous activities? Well, the world does record them. You can look up the word libel in the dictionary and you'll know why it exists, because this is something that people do. They're libelous in the present day, and they're libelous about history. And they also, if they have bad histories, they don't want that known, because they want to present themselves as something that they're not, which works for them, but perhaps not for you if they probably weren't the type of people you were looking to get to know if you had your own right sense as a good person, right? But see, they know you want good things. They just want more good things for themselves, so they'll pretend to be a good person. So, for people who have been deceived, well, forgive yourself. This is a strategy that certain people come up with. We call them con artists. It doesn't matter where they come from. Con artists exist. And they do con people. And so this is sort of a subsidiary of that con is the political racket. So they just organized it on a state-like actor level. And that's what they sort of do as their business. And they've flipped a couple of places, but their policies are extremely unpopular. What a surprise. So what does that indicate? You just need to know where there's a 10% approval rating, and you've pretty much got a 100% chance of running into some. So, but is it a fait accompli? Look, I'm pretty sure they have to maintain these facades to keep the most people most in the dark. So that's a full-time operation. That's a lot of plates being juggled in the air. And a lot better people than them didn't manage that as well as they thought they could have amongst multitudinous of parties. And so they didn't attempt to do it because they didn't think it was going to be possible. or that it could have possible negative consequences for them. And so they didn't commit such aggressive acts, but are there not criminals that will steal a watch off someone, that will also surveil places where people have such watches? Are there such audacious people that would threaten violence to get something they want? Yes or no? If you answered yes, you're correct. They exist. So a functioning government needs to be able to admit that to itself and also reform itself and also divest itself from such operators and personalities and questionably aligned or not so skilled operators. And they shouldn't be let off the hook. History won't let them off the hook, but I don't know why you would. Might be some type of leveraging, which is understandable, right? That's how slave drivers do it. So you think their system is better? I don't think they have full support, no matter how much impunity they have. It's much better to have a volunteer, participatory civic society. Something they think is too naive to exist. And they have had quite a run. That's sort of the thing. But see, for their thing to work, they have to make you believe that they're a friendly party, which is not a very honorable thing to do. But again, honor is in the eye of the beholder. Living in a rook society is not very honorable either.